welcome to another episode of Wellness Curated. I'm your host, Anshu Bahanda, and my aim with this podcast is to highlight ideas, trends, and techniques to help you get healthier and lead your dream life. So anyone who's experienced heartbreak will tell you that it's actually a very real feeling at the pit of your stomach. Similarly, if you've gone through anxiety and depression, it's not just something that's in your head. Like, sometimes we say to people, stop fussing, you have something happening in your head. It's actually a very physical pain. And people who have, when you talk to Ayurvedic experts in India, for centuries, they've talked about the physical manifestation of emotions. Similarly, Chinese medicine doctors will tell you immense anger, it'll affect your liver, it'll affect your liver functions. And also, if you have something wrong with your liver, it affects you and makes you angry. So we're going to discuss today about the physical manifestation of emotions. Do emotions actually manifest physically? And when we have physical ailments, do they come out in the form of emotions? So we have two wonderful guests with us today. So to throw some light on this, we have psychotherapist and psychological astrologer Arya Timblo, and we have internationally licensed Heal Your Life workshop coach, psychologist, and rational emotive behavior therapist Sushma IR. Welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Anshu.
Thank you
for having us here.
Sushma, tell us a little bit about this Heal Your Life methodology.
Okay, so Heal Your Life is basically based on Louise Hay's best-selling book, You Can Heal Your Life, which has sold millions of copies, right?
Yes.
And the fundamental message that she says is we choose thoughts, and our thoughts create our present and our reality. And thoughts are nothing but words. So when we choose different thoughts, we can change our present and our future, and that's how change our reality, right? And the crux of the entire concept of Heal Your Life is when we start to love ourselves and when we start to accept ourselves, we can change our thoughts automatically, and then we choose nourishing thoughts for ourselves. And therefore, the emotions that we experience also serve us. And eventually, the future that we create is beautiful too.
So is loving yourself the crux of it all?
Yes.
Oh, that's lovely. That's wonderful. In fact, I've been doing this Joe Dispenza meditation on loving yourself, which is so powerful. Tell me, why do emotions have so much power over us? And also, some people can cope better than others. So why is that?
Right. So the thing is that usually it's the thought that causes an emotion. However, since we're thinking all the time, the tendency is to not recognize the thought.
Right.
However, since emotions, like you said, they come with physical body sensations, right? That's when we're able to recognize that sensation, because of which we say, okay, I'm feeling a particular way, right? And we sometimes are able to label the emotions. Sometimes we are not able to label the emotions, but the feeling is real. Right? And to talk about it, and I'm going to now refer a little bit from the REBT standpoint, right? We all experience positive emotions and negative emotions, but in the negative emotions, there are healthy emotions or helpful emotions and unhealthy or unhelpful emotions, right? So when I feel like a real strong rage, that is going to be unhelpful, right? It's going to further cause physical pain, right? And I'm going to feel it very intensely. So to answer your question, someone who is in a situation, when they choose thoughts to help with the negative situation, they experience perhaps a negative emotion, which could be irritation or annoyance, which helps them cope with the situation. As again, someone who says, how could something like this happen to me, and how dare they, and how dare the world, and so on, because of which they experience intense rage, and then you can feel it all through your body.
Right.
So that's how there are some people who are able to, cope better in a negative situation, whereas there are certain others who are absolutely not able to, and they kind of succumb to the negative situation.
Okay. And Arya, welcome back to the show. We had such a fun show last time on psychological astrology, which a lot of people found very useful.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, picking up from where Sushma left off, can you tell us why do some people cope better?
It's a very significant question. And the truth is, in my experience, both as a psychotherapist as well as a psychological astrologer, and working for quite a few years, 18 years in this field, I found that there is a combination of factors. One is the genetic structure of an individual. The other is a conditioning. Another way to put it is a person's nature and the person's nurture.
Yeah.
And certain people have a predisposition to psychosomatize. Psychosomatize meaning psyche being the soul and soma meaning in Greek the body. For example, athletes or people who use their body like a gymnast or someone else who's very physically active. They have the potential of working with the body. Now, the potential is also what we overuse. So they might push their bodies, for example. What happens then is that it takes the brunt of it and it accumulates stress. For example, if I overwork and I overdo it. So certain people have a pre-genetic disposition to overexert themselves and take out stress in a certain way through their bodies. And if their conditioning, the family environment, their early family environment didn't teach them how to healthily let it out, blow off steam, so to speak, or express it more creatively through art or through other forms of exercise, meditation, yoga as we have in India, then it becomes a little more complicated for them and they tend to have what we consider to have dis-ease. Dis-ease is really the disequilibrium within the body, which actually in its natural form knows how to have homeostasis.
Okay. Homeostasis, explain that to us before we carry on.
So homeostasis is a form of equilibrium, right? Now what happens is that certain people are not in tune with themselves. Now what happens when people, for example, from early childhood have experienced too much fear or too much anger or danger or unsafety, which is really, really important to our development as human beings. They accumulate their anger or the fear or the lack of safety, and it starts to build in their body. Now, unless they learn healthy outlets, like I said, hopefully they get modeled, Tai Chi or meditation or yoga, whatever it is. But in this situation of people who don't, that is where it starts to get accumulated and suppressed in the body.
Okay. And I wanted to ask you, so the physical manifestation of an emotion, is it likely to be things like backache and migraine, or could it be other things as well?
Each person has a genetic predisposition to be sensitive in a certain area.
Right.
So, for example, certain people's energies get caught up in their throat because the throat is, if you even think about it symbolically, the throat is our form of expression. So if they're holding back their feelings, I think you might resonate from Louise Hay's perspective as well. If we don't speak our truth, if we're not able to be honest and stand up for our values, what we need, it gets stuck in the throat. And if we are not able to find, whether it's with that person, if we're not able to find another outlet, it can accumulate for a person with that genetic disposition to be sensitive over there.
Actually, I'd love your views on this as well, Sushma, with the Louise Hay thing. Why do certain emotions manifest in as certain pains?
In fact, just taking what Arya said one step further, Louise says something really amazing. She says that the reason why we are genetically predisposed to certain ailments is because as we grow up, we pick that up from our parents, right? So we see how my mother would respond to a threat situation, So I would unknowingly pick that up, and therefore that becomes an ailment because that's how I'm dealing with the emotion, and that's amazing, which is why the hereditary ailments apparently, as per Louise's research, she says it comes from it could come from observing as well.
Wow. So it's not just nature, it's a combination.
Yes.
Even nature is a combination of nature and nurture is what you're saying.
Yes.
Fabulous.
Yes.
And I agree with
Fantastic.
that as well, because we have a predisposition, and then we are being exposed to somebody, and their reaction may not be the most healthy. For example, people who have heart issues, and it's genetically passed on from issue to issue. The heart is considered to be the seat of the soul, right? And it's a fountain of joy, so to speak, astrologically as well as when you look at psychologically. And when the people are disconnected from that, they have a tendency to be fearful and overadaptive. And that starts to accumulate, and that is when the heart actually reacts very strongly. Now, if you're my parent, whether it's a mother or father or the environment, also my conditioning is do that. I learned that as a way of a coping mechanism.
Right.
And just
So it's
one
very
more thing,
blurry.
yeah. Just one more thing to add to that is, and it adds to my belief, right? Where I say, oh, you know what? My family has this heredity of maybe heart attacks, and I keep saying
And
that
then
to
it
myself.
goes into your subconscious
Yes.
mind, and from there it goes on to your
Yes.
physical
Yes.
body. Yeah,
And just
absolutely.
any discomfort, and I'm going like, oh, you know what?
Yeah.
This could happen, and I know this is going to happen, and we affirm it. So.
So what do you see, Arya? What do you see in charts when there is aches and pains in someone's body?
I look at it from both hats. I look at it from a psychotherapist, which is my first training, and I also look at it from a psychological astrologer. Now, very loosely, when we look at the chart, we see the person's potential. Again, we also see the genetic structure. We see the conditioning of the family and where they're coming from. And there's particular areas of the chart where we see the body and how is a person using their body, what is their potential, how do they process things. Certain planets over there can give you an idea. For example, I was looking at a chart of a woman who was a very on many levels, she's very overadaptive and fearful. So she tries to please and people please, where you kind of like, okay, I'm stretching myself, but I'm not realizing it. I'm going to do that so someone likes me more. Now, what happens is in the area of her chart for her body, she had the planet Mars there, which is about assertion. And what I was seeing in her chart is that there's a transit that's going to be coming up that will activate the suppressed anger that she has been disconnected from.
Right.
So what I discussed with her is that I see this, and she's familiar with astrology. So I said, I see that this is something that you've been holding on for so long. This is a really good time from this period onwards to start to look at asserting yourself. So she started to look at sports, she started to look at Tai Chi, she looked at Taekwondo, she looked at ways of healthily getting the anger out that she had been holding in all these years. Yeah. So this is one example of how you can try to creatively work with the flow of the energies that are coming up through the chart.
And that's what I love about what you do. It's not just about making predictions.
No, not
it's
at all.
about creatively, exactly what you said, creatively working with the energies.
Yes.
That was really interesting. Now, Sushma, in the introduction, we talked about Chinese astrology.
Yes.
Chinese medicine.
Yes.
And we talked about the liver and how when you're angry, it affects your liver. But when your liver is affected, then you feel rage. So can you tell us a little bit about that from the Louise Hay point of view?
Right. So Louise Hay, in fact, has made like a directory of sorts.
Yes.
Where she talks about the various ailments and the various parts of the body and what they could represent. And when you think about it closely, it makes a lot of sense logically as well, right? So anything to do with the knees, for example. The knees are about helping us move forward. So there could be an inhibition of something new, which I'm not able to, come to terms with, because of which perhaps I could be having knee pain, right? And same goes with, Arya mentioned about the throat, right? When you hold yourself back, you want to express yourself, but you are not able to. And therefore you experience throat pain. So it's amazing. And the stomach, for example, is about nourishment, right? So anytime that you feel intimidated about what's in store, I don't know what's going to happen, there is this protective mechanism because of which, you feel it in your stomach, and the churning is a lot to do with, I don't know what's going to happen. We colloquially call it the butterflies in the stomach. Even in a social setup. But then when that becomes too much and when it gets into the negative space, it can cause a lot of anxiety, and the anxiety is causing the stomach churning. And the more I recognize the stomach churning, it just kind of exacerbates the emotion as well. So it becomes like a cycle that we get trapped in.
So you talked about Louise Hay's directory, right? It's really
Yes.
interesting because I've been reading it for years. When I have a pain, I actually sometimes go and refer to it and see what is causing it. And so tell me some of them, like financial stress. Where does that show up?
Right.
Or backache, some of the common pains that people
Yes.
have, shoulder pains.
Yes.
Tell us what is the reason for all those things.
Right. So, in fact, you spoke
Sure.
about financial
Yeah.
stress, right? So, as per the Heal Your Life philosophy, the back is the symbol of the support of our life, right? Because that's the backbone, correct? And financial stress is where you feel pain in the lower back. So, and it's got nothing to do with your financial capacity or your ability to pay bills, it's just the attitude where I think I might not be able to, which is why it will like, for example, let's imagine that there's a couple and one of them loses their job, there's this sudden burden that the other couple feels, the other partner feels, where they say, oh my God, how am I going to get the money from, and it's got nothing, their financial stability may not be affected, but the anxiety that comes from the change is going to cause lower back pain. Similarly, shoulders, right? Or arms. When I feel burdened, when I feel like there's so much on me and I don't know how to go about it could cause pain in my arms, right? So it's very interesting that every part of the body has something or the other to do with emotions. And
how can you tell if what you're feeling is caused by emotions or by an underlying physical ailment, something to do with, like, a muscle tear could have happened, or an injury?
Yes.
Using that philosophy, how can you tell?
So Louise says that every ailment definitely has an emotional undercurrent, so to speak. Yes.
Every single ailment.
Yes. And in fact, she was diagnosed with cancer. And this was after many years of her actually doing the work, and she was taken aback because she thought she'd already processed all her emotion and everything. And she said, oh my God, where is this coming from? And she realized that she had a lot of resentment which she had to work through. And that was so deeply buried that, it actually came to the fore.
Right.
Now, having said that, it doesn't mean that, if I have, say, a ligament tear, I don't go and cure it, with a doctor. But it always helps to see where it is coming from emotionally, and what are the various emotions that I perhaps need to process. Right. And if we actually look back and analyze, it does go down to self-love, self-approval, sometimes a feeling of safety and security where I feel threatened. Therefore, I need to tell myself that I'm safe. The universe is here to protect me. And, there are these 4 or 5 things that you can actually narrow down to. And that's beautiful.
But what is really amazing is everything you're talking about, Louise Hay philosophy, it's coming down to us.
Yes.
It's about us and the internal. It's
Yes.
not about the external.
Yes.
That's very powerful.
Absolutely.
Arya, so how can we use psychological astrology to prevent emotional issues?
Again, I think it's looking at, well, there's 2 aspects. One is looking at the chart. The chart, I kind of almost use it as a blueprint for me. So I try to see what is this person's predisposition, what is their potential, what are healthy outlets they can do. Talking about it is the first step, like you said. It's one thing to acknowledge it, to realize also where does it stem from, to go back and therefore release it. The second aspect I look at it, whether it's through psychological astrology or whether it's a therapy session, is to find a healthier outlet. Supposing I tend to get anxiety attacks and I feel it in my stomach, how we talked about butterflies, but sometimes it can get more intense and it's a very physical, visceral pain. One tries to connect to that pain and help a person in the therapeutic session. For example, I look a lot at Gestalt psychotherapy. Gestalt, in a nutshell, looks at the whole and the parts. So I'll try to invite the client to understand their stomach. If your stomach could speak, can you touch it? Can you give it physical contact? Whatever is in disequilibrium, try to nurture it. Try to give it the contact and the healing connection and acknowledgement that it needs. So in Gestalt psychotherapy, one of the techniques we look at is speaking to the stomach or wherever the ailment is, touching it, giving it the strokes, giving it a bit like a mother would with a child, right? When the child gets hurt. And we start doing that in therapy, and ideally we invite a client to slowly start to do that themselves. Okay, you're feeling the fear. How does it feel? Fear. What does it feel? Fear like in your body? Okay, if it had a voice, what would it say to you? And I would invite the client to have a dialogue between the pain and between the rest of her. Very often you'll find that a person is dismissive of their pain. It's not convenient now. I have a deadline. I don't have the time for this. I'll just pop a pill and it'll go away. There are times where it's important to have medicine. I have no issues with medicine, but there's also helpful, like you were saying, Sushma, to try to work with it, So in that sense, I find Gestalt psychotherapy techniques very helpful to try to create a relationship with the pain and try to give it another outlet.
Thank you for that. So I've been through something really interesting in my life. When my first daughter, older daughter, went to university, I had a left frozen shoulder. And when my younger daughter went to university, I got a right frozen shoulder. Of course, I live in the UK and they went to the US, so they went far, far away. How would you explain that in the Louise Hay methodology? What was going on with me?
So the shoulder represents our ability to enjoy life.
Right.
And any ailment with the shoulder is to do with the attitude that we have towards whatever is taking place in life, right? So if I could ask you a question, right? How did you feel about your daughter actually going away? If you felt unsure, if there was any rigidity in your mind.
There's so many mixed emotions. When a child goes away to university,
absolutely.
Thousands of miles away, there's so many mixed emotions, right?
Correct. Yeah. And that explains it, right? Yeah. And assuming that two daughters, your two sides, that makes you a whole, right? That kind of explains how the first time your first daughter went away, you had one of your shoulders freezing, and then the second time the stiffness was in the other one. So that is where it comes from.
So is there a way of avoiding this kind of pain? The aim of this podcast is to help people.
Yes.
To help people, like we said, prevention is better than cure. So are there any exercises like, mindfulness? How can people become more resilient? How can we help people so that they don't go through things like this? I'm not just talking about frozen shoulder, but all kinds of ailments. How can they cope with their emotions better?
Right. So, unfortunately, we are brought up not taught how to express emotions, right? We are either told to deny them or suppress them or distract ourselves, right? And as a result, what happens is emotions by definition are energy in motion, right? So the job of an emotion is to flow. But the moment we suppress or deny or distract, we block it in our body. Right? So the most simple yet not easy way to go about it is to allow ourselves to express it. Right? So like Arya said, let's imagine I decide to go out for a run because I'm feeling a particular emotion. It's important that I tell myself I am allowing myself to let the emotion go as I involve myself in the physical activity. If I don't have that connection and that correlation, I'm going to think of it as a distraction.
Okay.
Right? And while definitely it's going to make me feel better because it's gone out of my system, I have not made that correlation, and therefore I'm not celebrating, dealing with the emotion.
That's a very good point. That you could do the same. You could do the same exercise, mental, physical, emotional. But if you haven't made the correlation, then we haven't explained to ourselves that we're dealing with it.
Yes. And correlating it with the self-love, right? If I could have a conversation with myself saying, I know that I need this, and here's me gifting myself this walk in the park, because I know that that's going to help me dissipate the emotions that I'm feeling, and I know that that's going to help me feel better. And then identifying the thoughts and changing the thoughts so that I'm not dependent on these walks in order for me to make me feel better.
Explain to me now what you mean identifying those thoughts and then dealing with them.
Right. So if we have to talk about a different emotion, like let's imagine anxiety, right? It's a very common emotion. Now, anxiety is usually caused by a lot of what if questions. Our thoughts comprise of what if questions, right? What if things go wrong? What if I don't reach a particular place on time? Whatever. And it doesn't stop. It's not an inquiry. It's a panic, correct? Because one what if leads to the second leads to the third, and then before we know it, we're stuck in a whirlpool of what if questions. So if I'm able to identify the what if question, and the what if is insinuating that it's going to be the worst case scenario, right? So if I could say that, it's not the end of the world, it's difficult, but I have gone through it in the past and I can handle it now once again. So again, I'm choosing these thoughts, right? I have first allowed myself to feel the anxiety. A lot of times people are so compelled to think that a negative emotion is not good, that they push themselves to feel, to feel a positive emotion, and that's not possible, right? In negative situation, you cannot feel a positive emotion. The idea is to work through the negative emotion and then move gradually to a space of peace and calm where you feel the positive emotion again. Right? So that journey requires you to first, step number one, allow yourself, give yourself the permission to feel the emotion.
Okay. So number one, feel the emotion.
Yes. Whatever it may be, without judging yourself for feeling the emotion.
Okay.
Right? Step number one, feel the emotion. Step number two, allow yourself to recognize the thought that caused the emotion. Because it's never just one thought. It's a repetition of those same thoughts.
Okay.
Right? Like, for example, how could I do such a horrible thing? How could I do such a horrible thing?
So the importance is also recognizing the thought, and that's where you might need the help of a therapist.
Yes.
You might not be able to do it yourself.
Yes, if you're not able to.
Okay.
So otherwise, go back to the what if questions that keep ringing in your head. Those are the thoughts.
Okay.
And then the change of thoughts. Step number 3, change those thoughts to more functional thoughts. For example, it's not the end of the world. Like when I say, what if this happens? So the tendency is to first tell ourselves, no, this won't happen. Right? But then the question stays, but what if it does?
It does.
Right?
Then, yeah. So figure out. So work out that it's not the end of the. So what? So what if this happens? Yeah. So that's number 3.
Yes.
And those are the 3 steps you would say which will help you.
Yes. And also physically, like if I can feel it in my body, allowing myself to engage in some kind of an activity which allows a healthy outlet for the emotion.
Feel the emotion, identify the thought, and change the thought.
Yes.
Those 3. And try and do this through a physical activity if you can.
Yes.
Okay. Very helpful. Thank you, Sushma.
Thank you.
So, Arya, do you have any tips for our listeners on how to deal with emotional issues that they cannot prevent? We have loss, we have grief, things happen. We can't prevent even if we're sitting on a mountain, we won't be able to prevent every emotion. So, can you give us some tips?
I guess it's a very relevant question because, like I said, we live in a very stressful world now, don't we, Anshu? Like we have deadlines, we are expected so much from our social media. Also, some people have very high stress level jobs. For example, I've seen doctors and working in emergency. I've seen psychotherapists, and I was working in a suicide prevention center before I had children. So there was very high stress. I think the important thing is, and this is very hard, to realize I need to prioritize me. My well-being is as good as and as important as what I need to do or whatever I'm going through. Supposing you've gone through bereavement or loss, it is important, like you said, to complete the emotion. The emotion is not a problem. It is the suppressing it or disconnecting it from it and letting it lodge and fester in your body, which is a problem. And I've actually spoken to some of the most hardworking psychotherapists or doctors that I know, and they say, if I don't give myself the 2 hours a day to whatever we put in our systems, we need to take out. Whatever stress we put in our systems, we need to take out. If we do not do that, we're heading towards problems, whether it's our mind or our body or our soul.
That's very true. So I have a lot of friends and family who are going through things like back pain. That seems to be fairly common now. So Sushma, tell me, how can we deal? I mean, obviously this is about responsibility, as you said, in the Louise Hay methodology. It's about being weighed down by responsibility. But how can we help people deal with it before it happens? Is there a way of doing that? And secondly, if it does happen, then what should people do?
To answer the first part, which is prevention, just like Arya said, right? Prioritizing our well-being and not allowing ourselves to spread ourselves thin just because, work needs us, people need, like family needs us, every social obligation that, it's a perception that it's an obligation, right? That's what we are telling ourselves. But if we could allow ourselves to recuperate, not just physically, but also emotionally and spiritually, that's going to help us be resilient to stress. So that's how we're going to be able to prevent a situation, right? And also, I think, like Arya said earlier, talking to the body, thanking the body for actually being such a loyal friend is so important, because we take the body for granted.
So give us some techniques on how to express emotions.
We spoke about expressing emotions earlier. Yes.
That's the 3-step process that we talked about. Okay.
Yes.
So and even before something happens, you would say, when the thoughts come in, start recognizing them.
Yes. No, it might be difficult to do that. The starting point of identification becomes the body sensation and therefore the emotion.
Okay.
Right? And then tracing back to the thought, because it's going to be difficult for me to keep observing my thought through the day, because we're doing other things. But the moment we feel it, like for example the pit in the stomach, or say a sensation in the head, like if I'm anxious, I could feel palpitations, or like sweaty palms and all these physiological symptoms. I think anxiety comes with the maximum number of physiological sensations. So the awareness that this is my body talking to me, saying, there's something that's coming up for you and you need to deal with it. Right? And then completing the cycle by thanking the body, saying, thank you that, you've been here for me, and, I promise to look after you as much as I can. So,
So what I'm getting from both of you is that we're not kind enough to ourselves. And that's really, we don't love ourselves enough. We're not kind enough to ourselves. One last question, actually. A lot of people go through knee pain, joint pain. What do the charts say when you see something like this?
I think there's a couple of things. Sushma was talking about how the knees relates to certain things. When I'm looking at it from a psychotherapeutic as well as a psychological astrology point of view, we look at the knees as a joint, which is a lot about bending. When you look at all religions, for example, whatever religion, there's something about submitting to a higher authority, right? When we go down on our knees, and sometimes we go down on our knees and cry, it's actually relinquishing control. So actually the whole skeletal system, according to psychological astrology, relates to the whole aspect of focusing too much on structure. So a person has that potential of being able to be in charge, take responsibility, take things on their shoulders, on their back, right? Their spine and their back. When we overdo that, that is when the joints or the back or the knee starts to hurt us. So it's a sign from our bodies telling us that we have to be kinder to ourselves. We have to be softer with ourselves. Some people have this very early. I had a friend in his teens, and he had back problems. But he used to worry too much. There was too much fear in his system, which was getting lodged in his back and his spine and his skeletal system. He needed treatment. So medical system is sometimes important when it's reached too much of a point. But he also started to work on it and realize that this is the shifts I need to make in my life. I really need to find that mind, body, soul kind of balance. And I'm happy to say in his 40s now, he's in a much better space. He's gotten off medication. He's learned how to soothe himself much better. So it is something, but it's a bit like our body, we need practice for things. We also need to practice self-nurturing. For me, I can't start my day, I don't end my day without doing whatever I need to do. I vent, I write a lot. And no matter how busy I am, I will always find time for me and taking care of myself so I can do my best and live up to my potential.
That's a very good point you made.
I don't
and it's
make
come
excuses.
up in a lot of our podcasts, is journaling. A lot of people have said it's been invaluable to them. Just write, when you're feeling lots of emotions, just write them down and write them down. Some people recommend keeping the pieces of paper and burning them and imagine them going to the light. Some people just say throw them away, tear them and throw them away. But writing is meant to be invaluable to deal with emotional issues. So thank you so much for your valuable advice, Arya Timblo and Sushma IR. That was such an interesting conversation. Just to do a quick recap, very quickly, how do emotions manifest? Sushma?
Emotions manifest when we choose thoughts that don't serve us, and those thoughts cause emotions, and that's how. And when we don't allow emotions to get out of our system, they fester and cause
Arya,
pain.
So your question is what causes emotions?
how
or
do
what-
emotions manifest? Yeah.
So it can have a healthy manifestation: love, joy, connection, a sense of belonging, a sense of unity, solidarity. That's the healthy expression. When I suppress that or I cut off from it, like we were talking about conditioning, where we say don't feel things. You're such a sissy. Suck it up. Don't feel like that, or don't get angry. It's very socially unacceptable for some families to like not cry, right? Because you're being weak. When we suppress it, it gets lodged in the body.
Okay. And what would you recommend to our listeners who might be experiencing pain? Sushma.
Firstly, talk to that part of the body that is hurting, because that is very, very, the body responds very quickly, but we don't end up doing that. So that's the first thing to do, and then identify the emotion and all of those things that we went over.
Okay, Arya.
Well, I have an interesting take because I feel that our pain is the biggest gift that it can give us. It's giving us a message. And our pain is always connected to our potential. For example, if my potential is to speak, it will be my throat which might get irritated because it's not getting its natural expression, right? If my tendency, my body is not getting its, if I'm a very physical, tactile and energetic person, if I don't get that, I will get aches and pains because my body's feeling restless. Listen to your pain. It is your greatest gift. So if you can connect to it and listen to it, you can also help it serve you in your potential.
Lovely. Thank you once again for taking the time to be on our show today. To our listeners, I hope you've learned something new today and that we brought you a little closer to leading a healthier, happier life. Don't forget to share this with your friends and family. Hit like and take a second to rate or review our show. Do write in to tell us what you'd like to know more about. Thank you for listening and be sure to take care of yourself.